So nearly every group has some form of groupspeak. Groupspeak is like the language or the jargon of that particular group. Generations have them. It's called slang. What are the kids saying these days? Lawyers have their own jargon. It's called legalese. Academics have their own jargon called academies. I know. We are seeing examples of groupspeak now with the code switching debate. A certain presidential candidate speaks differently when in front of different audiences. This is so that she can fit in with whom she's speaking to. Now, most people do this to a certain degree. We mimic those in our immediate vicinity, around language, around speech. This is actually part of being human because we are a social species. Now, being social is how humans have been able to take over the world. We are not the strongest. We are not, but we do work well in groups. And as we're learning on our channel, our natural sociability traps us in these unhealthy relationships. Now, what is the most unhealthy relationship that there is? If you said timeshare, you are absolutely correct, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about cult language. Now, being in a cult is one of the most unhealthy relationships that you can be in, second only to timeshare. So why can't people just speak normally in front of all people? Well, any sort of speech will put you into a group. I am speaking generic American gringo right now, and that puts me in the group of overly online middle-class Americans. If I spoke with a Boston accent, that would put me in the group of Bostonians. Then down to the neighborhood, north or south, and down to the class, working class or prep school, and we can get even smaller and smaller and smaller. Some families have their own form of group speak. They have shared lingo and phrases. For example, have you seen that episode of Peep Show, the Christmas episode where Mark's family gets together and they talk about pulling a Jez? Jez is fucking up. Jez is a character on the show and he's a fuck up. So that's their own lingo, their own shared language, family group speak. It is basically a way to show who is in the group and who's not in the group, who's not in the know, who's other. Now, this video was supposed to be about brainwashing in general, but it's such a broad term. Really, brainwashing is the far extreme of the influence spectrum. So cult brainwashing is actually a controversial topic because we use so many of those same brainwashing tactics in all of our groups. And we're in a lot of groups. So some of these groups expect more from you than others, or more high pressure than others, but they all have some sort of peer pressure in them. Peer pressure. You remember it from when you were a teen? Yes, it's very real, even as adults. Now then, if you're lucky, you're in a really cool group where your peers don't want you to pressure anybody, but then you feel peer pressure not to pressure anybody. We do unconsciously start speaking like the people who are around us. We all have this urge to adapt and fit in, but some people take this urge and they take it to a whole nother level. And cults actually use this tendency and weaponize it against us as a form of control, more so than other groups. Now, this particular passage comes from this book, Cults and New Religious Movements, a reader, and it's edited by Lauren L. Dawson. This is from chapter 9. Can I get to it? Now, this is from chapter 9 of this reader. It's The Process of Brainwashing, Psychological Coercion, and Thought Reform by Margaret Thaler Singer. So that's really interesting. If you can find this book, definitely grab it. Now, Singer was a renowned psychologist that specialized in group therapy. She gave expert testimony in the Patty Hearst trial. Do you remember Patty Hearst, who was kidnapped and supposedly brainwashed by the Symbionese Liberation Army? Yes, a Rate My Cult is coming. Just be patient. I'm doing my research, and research leads to other research, which leads to other research, and I'm in a rabbit hole, and please don't rush me. Anyway, so this person, Singer, gave testimony in that trial. And the controversy with Singer and the whole brainwashing theory is, well, how is a cult different than any other group? Every group does this. Now, Singer used to give expert testimony as far as cult brainwashing goes, but then the vibe kind of shifted in the courts, and people accepted that, well, everybody has free will. And so what if it's a coercive tactic? It was the individual's choice to join with a group. That's not really brainwashing. Singer and her theories kind of fell out of fashion in the courts, and they stopped hearing her testimony. But they still hear brainwashing testimony in Europe because Europe doesn't pretend to follow our free speech laws or our personal freedom laws. Now, why is it different in Europe? Hitler. It's Hitler. They basically have a different idea of what freedom means and how you have to check it for our own good or the good of society. So we have certain rules, Europe has different rules, and you kind of have to weigh those when we're talking about brainwashing. Because in the United States, a lot of things are legal. We have the First Amendment, which permits freedom of speech and freedom of religion, two very important freedoms that are required to start a cult. So basically, that singer and the editor of this work, this Lauren L. Dawson, makes a point that he does not agree with Singer that brainwashing is real. Fine. All of that is beside the point. It was kind of a tangent, but you should know the background for this video. This video is about groupspeak and how language can be manipulated to control individuals. I do agree that these techniques are ubiquitous, and it's really unfair to single out cults. In the United States, at least. Fair criticism, but it doesn't take away from the point of this video. Groupspeak is the language that you use to indicate that you're part of a group. And to do so, you show loyalty to the group and fraternity with its other members. So we're in a club and we share the same values. Think of the term narc. It has a negative connotation. And if you use it, you signal that you don't talk to the police. So if you use the term informant, that would signal that you don't judge people who do talk to the police. Just little things like that you don't even think about. And you would be shocked. You would be absolutely shocked to see how much language actually controls our thoughts. I'm not saying it's 100%, but it is really, really powerful. So here's a story. My little baby is 1 year old, and he is perfect, and he screams all of the time, but he doesn't really speak. He's not speaking in full sentences. But he has this little baby friend who's 15 months old, and the little baby friend looks up to my little baby who's vocalizing. Can you hear it in the background, him vocalizing so much? That is screaming. He is screaming in the background. Anyway, his little friend just looks up to him like we would look up to a stand-up comedian or someone giving a speech or something, and he's just nodding along and laughing at certain parts, and I'm like, what are you even interpreting? You're a baby. Both of you are babies. But that's only to say that the way we communicate verbally isn't all language, but language is a huge part of it. So when we're talking about us, we're talking about adults here, we use language, but the language kind of covers up for whatever that baby thing is, which I don't even know how you would quantify because it's just a series of grunts and screams. Anyway. Listen to this passage from Singer. She's describing her own criteria for thought reform. Thought reform is also known as brainwashing. And she gets to number 6. She says, the group puts forth a closed system of logic and an authoritarian structure that permits no feedback and refuses to modify it except by leadership approval or executive order. What? So basically, you are told what to think and you are not to question it. And if that changes, if something changes, it will change from the leader down. You will be told about the change. It hasn't changed by debate. So you're like, okay, that's all well and good. I see that. But what does it have to do with language? Well, she gets to it. Don't be lazy. You got to keep reading. Later in the passage, it says, you affirm that you accept and understand the ideology by beginning to talk in simple catchphrases, particular to the group. This communication has no foundation since, in reality, you have little understanding of the system beyond the catchphrases. Do you remember we talked about slogans in that video, how they brainwash you? That was by Hannah Arendt, about Hannah Arendt and the trial of Eichmann. Basically, when asked about National Socialism, about the Nazis, he just kept repeating these party slogans and didn't really understand them further. He kind of stopped at the party slogans. And when I was reading this, I just thought back to the Eichmann trial when I was reading about catchphrases, slogans, hashtags, whatever. Now, if you are online at all, you can identify what group another person online is by the phrases that they use. We all can do it. If someone says the patriarchy, well, you know they have feminist indoctrination. And if they say colonialism in the extent of how our world is currently made up, you know that they have critical theory indoctrination. If they say social Marxism, you know they have conservative indoctrination, and so forth and so on. They might not be full-fledged members of that group, but they may be and not even know it, because if they're already adopting the vocabulary, they're adopting the ideas. Now, Singer goes on to say in the next paragraph, using the new language fosters your separation from your old conscience and belief system. Your new language allows you to justify activities that are clearly not in your interest, perhaps not even in the interest of mankind. Precisely those behaviors that lead to criticism from the outside world because they violate the norms and rules of the society as a whole are rationalized within the cult community through use of this new terminology, this new language. Does that strike you as familiar? Now, this reminded me a lot of therapy culture or the cult of self. Nowadays, it is perfectly acceptable to cut off your parents because they are toxic. If people didn't have the word toxic, they could never justify cutting off their own parents. This is a big move. Without that word, they'd actually have to say, my parents are dangerous. Well, they're not actually dangerous. Well, they're toxic. So cutting off your parents, such a serious move, and it should only be done in the case of extreme negligence or violence or manipulation, and to do it because they annoy you, or they don't respect your boundaries, they annoy you, or because they don't support your lifestyle, or they don't affirm you. To me, that is actually insane in the grand scheme of things. But people do it because they have this new vocabulary to justify it. And honestly, most people will not say therapy culture is a cult, except for Paul Fitz, who would, and he wrote a whole book on it called The Cult of Self and did a video. Check that out. This passage just reminded me of therapy culture. That's all. I was reminded. Now, there are other examples of catchphrases that are substituting for whole ideas or political theories. It happens a lot in politics, not just with Eichmann. What does Make America Great Again mean? There are very few people who will be able to tell you exactly what that means, but a lot of people say it, just like Free Palestine. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? How? They don't know. These are just catchphrases, and it shuts off that thinking in their brains. I've already said the thing. I don't have to think anymore. Unfortunately, this is a lot of people. Now, in my personal opinion, catchphrases and slogans in politics are very dangerous because it works people up into a frenzy and convinces them to do things against their own interests, just like Singer claims. Now, Singer goes on to list Robert Lifton's criteria for thought reform, brainwashing. Robert Lifton is a psychiatrist who studied psychological causes of political movements and wars and, of course, cults. He's still alive, actually. She says, at first, translating from their native tongue to Groupspeak forces members to censor, edit, and slow down spontaneous bursts of criticism and oppositional ideas. That helps them cut off negative or resistive feelings. Eventually, speaking in cult jargon is second nature, and talking with outsiders becomes energy-consuming and awkward. We see this a lot with slang. You can't speak the kids' slang. You can't speak to the kids. So now they can only speak the cult jargon, and there is no language to express ideas that are not already within the cult's worldview. She goes on. Soon enough, members find it most comfortable to talk only amongst themselves in their new vocabulary. So this is how cults can isolate members from their family and friends and really larger society by controlling their language and how much they understand. It goes on. To reinforce this, all kinds of derogatory names are given to outsiders, wogs, systemites, reactionaries, unclean, of Satan, and we can add from the internet, NPCs, and normies. So online groups do the same as cults. Trans ideologues called non-trans cis. Cis is the outgroup. The far left dismisses criticism from colonizers, and the far right doesn't want to listen to libs. We don't have to listen to the outgroup, remember. They have nothing to add. They are less than us. Other us. They don't speak our language. Now, I mentioned legalese before. That's the language of lawyers, legalese. Did you see this recent study from MIT? I'll show you. Don't worry. I'll show you. MIT's study explains why laws are written in an incomprehensible style. The convoluted legalese used in legal documents conveys a special sense of authority, and even non-lawyers have learned to wield it. The article goes on to say, just as magic spells are written with a distinctive style that sets them apart from everyday language, the convoluted style of legal language appears to signal a special kind of authority, the researchers say. So I don't know why they needed a study to show this. We all know this about legalese and why lawyers speak the way they do. I think people adopt legalese like it's like a spell, like the article said. They feel it has power, and the law does have power over us, just as people code switch into the dominant language in a business environment because the dominant group writes the checks. Kind of simple. Now, for law in business, the language makes sense oftentimes, but in cults, it's not always that way. Sometimes you'll come across some like really wacky word work. Singer goes on to describe how one group defined criticism. She says here, justification for having done an overt, and then look up overt and it says overt act. An overt act is not just injuring someone or something. An overt act is an act of omission or commission, which does the least good for the least number of dynamics or the most harm to the greatest number of dynamics and so on. Basically, no one can define criticism because they define it in these obscure terms that are themselves redefined. And the group just accepts this. They don't know what it means. They just know it as a slogan, and they don't want to admit that they don't know what it means because then they would show that they're not really in the group. They're not really in the know. So Singer says of that group, the group's founder has stated that new followers or potential converts should not be exposed to the language and cosmology of the group at too early in a stage. Talking whole track to raw meat is frowned upon. So that's what that means. So no people will get scared away by the vocabulary, and they have to be a certain level of initiation, a certain level of initiate before they can learn all these new words. If you introduce it to them before, you're just going to scare them away, as you should, because people are clearly weird. Now, Groupspeak is actually similar to groupthink, which we covered in a video years back. Definitely check that video out. So I guess the point of this video here is to watch the language that you adopt. We think it's harmless, but it is shaping how we think, and we are often not even aware of it. Now, if the group can get you to adopt the language, it can get you to adopt its ideas. Using a group's phrases signals that you are part of the group and does so in front of others. It's subtle, but it's there. And then that becomes an identity you have to defend later. It's really insidious. It's kind of just tweaking with your head. So let me know if there are examples of groupspeak that I missed, if there's something that is just staring me in the face, like the orange juice when you open the door to look for the orange juice and it's right there and you still can't find it. I'm sure there are many, many that you can think of. Anyway, like, share, and subscribe for more content.